if you've been a pastor for any time, you probably ran into a problem that necessitates a policy in this conversation. Do you have a policy that you use for new members serving in the church? We've been blessed with some new and young members who are eager to serve. I love their desire to serve. However, they are very young in their faith, and it would seem like it would be best to invest in their spiritual growth before allowing them to serve in ministries. Many of our ministries are nursery, Awana, church, children's church. They take them out of the regular Sunday morning and Wednesday gathering. We have made this mistake in the past. It seems that it would be best for them to wait for those that need spiritual nourishment. If you do this, what is your policy? Now, I'm going to add this caveat because I think what this person is saying when they say young members is like new people who are starting to attend the church. Because
not 19-year-olds.
I mean, they could be young.
No, sorry, I'm not.
I think they're saying newer believers.
Yeah. But when they see the
like
word
young in their
members,
faith.
I don't know if because when we use the word members, we're talking about people who've gone through the membership class, and so there's probably been some vetting. I would hope if there are members of your church, for them to even be members, they would qualify to serve. Immediately.
True.
Or probably already serving. But I'm thinking the way this person is talking about it.
I think you're right, Frank.
Is that they're just like new to the church, which is a valid question.
Yep.
How guys have you handled this? How do you aspirationally want to handle this? What do you think?
I think there's a difference between leading and serving. And I think where that line is might be different in different churches. You probably should have a different standard for serving on the parking team if your church has a parking team than for teaching the new members class. You should probably have a different standard for someone who wants to bring a casserole to the potluck than someone who wants to lead worship. And then in my context, we've had issues because not everybody has seen the line between being a worship leader and someone who is serving on a praise team, to which I'd say there's a difference. One person is
that's a complicated conversation.
It's a very complicated conversation. And once you're up on stage and there's microphones involved, everything gets more complicated. But in general, I think you need to say, what is the difference between leading and serving? And anybody should be able to serve. I think we see that throughout the New Testament. There's no metric of spiritual maturity to jump in and start serving. I think there should be spots in your church for people who maybe don't even agree with necessarily all the things that you're doing. Again, whether that's, I feel like I'm throwing shade on the parking team, but there should be spots for anybody and everybody who wants to come in and serve. I think that's very different than leading, and that's what you need to define.
So you're saying you want to fence leadership positions, and when you say that, how would you define a leadership position? Is that something that's like places where people have influence, or public-facing places? What does that look like?
I think influence. I think teaching is a big part of it. Yeah. If you are going to worship ministry, and Jeff, you're the guy who has experience here, but how many churches do we know that hire out musicians from time to time? And some of those musicians may or may not be vetted the way that you would vet a member who is serving. But I know of fairly affluent churches that are influential churches that will go and pay a drummer a couple $100 to sit in for a weekend because their drummer's out of town and they don't have somebody else in the hopper. Well, that's different than, hey, you're teaching Sunday school to a group of sixth graders. I think there are some things that you serve because that's your gift to serve in that area, but you're not necessarily leading people. I think leading people is the difference.
I think there's another aspect to this question, because what they're saying is when they serve, they're missing our main Sunday gathering or our main Wednesday night gathering. So I think practically speaking, a good policy might be maybe they don't serve more than once a month. If there's a need in that area and you don't have there's pros and cons of multiple services. Obviously, if you have multiple services, you can serve one, attend one, and that kind of helps out in that area. But if you only have one main Sunday gathering and one main Wednesday gathering, maybe you're not allowed to serve both Sunday and Wednesday that week, so you can attend one. And also, I would say once a month. That way there's a rotation. I understand the question. Like, the desire is we want our new believers to be in service and to grow in their faith, and that's a great desire. But at the same time, part of growing in your faith is serving in some capacity. So there needs to be a both and here. So maybe a good policy would be one or the other, and once a month. That way you're not missing more than one Sunday a month.
Yeah, I back everything y'all just said. I would add to that, a couple easy changes you can make is in your new member class or however you do it. When you finish the class and they decide if they are going to join the covenant family, you can have places indicated where they would like to serve. And in that one, that will help them get their foot in the door. And all those places would be like a pipeline. And this is one thing where I would say train your leaders. Like, for example, someone wants to serve in kids ministry, then put them in what I would call the kids ministry pipeline, where they just come and they do a first serve one week and they're just mostly observing. And that way the leader who's over that ministry or pastor can observe them and see where their strengths are. And then within that pipeline, I would have enough volunteers where your people aren't being sucked up every week. I know at our church, in our kids ministry, I mean, it is our kids ministry has grown a lot, but we still, as far as like nursery and just watching children, we try to put them on a once every 6 to 8 week rotation. And what does that mean? That means we had to, at one point we had to more than double our leaders, but it actually created more space for people to step up, and it let people know that, hey, we're really concerned about your spiritual walk. The one concern I would have, because let's be honest, as pastors, a lot of times you're just using discernment when it comes to like leadership roles. If someone's new to your church and they immediately want to teach a class, that's a red flag to me. Especially, and I got to watch what I say because I know congregants listen, but if it's a class on polarizing hot topic issues or issues that may stray away from the doctrinal statement of your church. Because
hey, God has really equipped me to teach our class on Revelation at this church that I've been a member of for the past 3 weeks.
Great
when can
example.
I start?
Or when it's someone who like just came from another church tells, Tim or me like, hey, I just left this church. I was an elder there and I taught the theology class. Like, use me now, coach. And it's like, why did you leave your last church? Like, we have so many questions, right? Like we don't want to move this too quickly. So, but yeah.
No, and what do y'all think it's okay to ever? To contact former churches if these guys are? I
Yes,
think so.
100%.
I think so.
Please do.
Yeah, especially if they're wanting to teach. Why aren't they there?
Yeah.
And they might say because they wanted to run the show. Well, then you just avoided a thing.
Yeah, I think obviously my main experience in this, in terms of people serving, has been in music ministry, and there is a lot of nuance there. Even down to like, is there a difference between playing an instrument and singing? I think there probably is, because playing an instrument isn't making you say words that you don't mean and like lie in front of God and everybody. If you're a atheist and you're leading a song that starts with "I love you, Lord," probably not a good place to put you. So, but in terms of new people serving, yeah, you definitely want to make it normative that serving is part of what we do here. And so you want that to be a culture thing. And I would say this is a good argument for the biblical offices of deacons and elders. Because in those offices, we have qualifications that are spiritually based. Now, I'm not saying that every person that serves in our churches has to have a title deacon or elder, but obviously elders are pretty specific, but deacons are pretty wide open. I'm one of my goals this year for our church is to sort of bring back and institute deacons again. We have elders, and we have deacons, practically speaking, but we don't have the title right now. We don't call people deacons right now, but we're going to by the end of this year, hopefully. And so in terms of like a policy, I think one of the challenges in smaller churches is that, like you said, Frank, policies kind of happen on the backside of things, where an issue comes up and you haven't ever needed to have this policy before and you didn't think of it. So right now our church is growing and there's a lot of new people serving, and kind of my method is slower rather than quicker. I think you need to, especially in a smaller church context, you need to kind of put to death the idea that like you need to move fast. You don't have to move fast. You can move slower. We have a person now who plays drums with us who, and I'm just using him as an example. He came to our church for a good long while before he ever started playing drums, because what you don't want to do on the other side of it as a leader is make people feel like you just want them for their gifting. You want them as a person. And so you want to invest in them as a person and build a relationship. But at the same time, in a small church, it's awesome to have a drummer. We didn't have one for like 8 years, and now we have a really good one. And so that's a blessing. And so the temptation is to maybe put somebody in a position that they're unqualified for. This plays itself out a lot for us in children's ministry too, because we are growing a lot with children's ministry. We have a lot of kids. We have a lot of little ones right now, and the little ones take more manpower. You know, you need like more nursery workers per kid than you do like when they're older. And so you just have to kind of move slow. And I would say, yeah, you know, basic policy is, are they a Christian? In children and youth ministry, are they background checked?
Yeah, I was going to say that.
That should definitely be in your policy. If they're dealing with anybody under the age of 18, background check them. And like, if you're not sure if you should background check them, and just have that on there. And then, you know, it's about who's got the gifting to do what. Obviously, teaching the Bible is really important. And so I think the elders need to know who is everyone in our church who teaches the Bible to anybody, whether that be young kids, middle school, Sunday school, high school. You know, as the elders of the church, our job is to watch over the doctrine and the teaching. And so we need to know who's all doing the teaching. And if you give me a list of people who are teaching and, you know, I'm like, who is this person? And they're brand new, then I'm going to have some conversations about why are we putting this person in a position where they might fail too. That's the other part of it. You know, it's not just about like them serving the program. It's about how well are we as leaders serving that person as they serve the program. So that's really important too. And like what Tim said, yes, serving is a method of discipleship. You know, one of the ways Jesus trained his disciples is he sends them out 2 by 2. And that was part of his training to them. And so I think you have to keep that in mind too. So my biggest advice would just be, you know, everything we've said, and then just kind of make it the culture that you move slower rather than faster to put people into positions.
So as I am thinking about my church plant, obviously it's like everybody who's serving is going to be new in this conversation. And so I'm praying about like, so how do I obviously, like, I'm going to heavily rely on my launch team vet folks for those leadership positions. And I think like a long-term standard is like, okay, I'm going to make a list of like the different roles of every ministry and be like, okay, these roles should only be like by members, because hopefully when we have members, they are people who are believers. And then these are people who like, we can trust in like leadership positions. And then even beyond that, then like who's qualified to teach stuff, and that's another kind of other vetting. And then I should have, based on that, a list of volunteer positions, maybe in similar departments. Like there might be a position in the worship team where like if you're a vocalist or a tech director, if you will, those are going to be members positions, or at least like vetted positions, where like a lighting person, if you have that, or a camera person, or a
what kind of church plant are you expecting, Frank?
Dang, bro.
Go big or go home.
Okay. Let me think of like in terms of like
Say
Lakeview.
you've been at a big church for the last decade without saying it.
Sure. So Lakeview has a
So like I need my administrative assistant to be a background check.
The LED
elder?
screen operator, though, doesn't have to be.
At Lakeview, there's a person that's running the stream.
Sure.
Okay. I don't know if that person needs to be a member.
Yeah.
Per se, they have a lot of power to sabotage the service, but like,
True.
But I think if you were having the bass player be someone who, I don't know if that person necessarily needs to be a Christian, but that person definitely doesn't need to be a member in order to play bass.
Not
right?
at Lakeview.
Yeah.
At Lakeview, they do.
Technically, at Lakeview, you do.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think.
But what happens? So you have that policy, and what happens if you lose a couple of drummers? Then do you say,
Tim is
we're
drumming.
gonna
Acoustic
between the
set.
two of you, you're fine. But you know, if let's say you lose a lead guitar player
Yeah.
and Christmas Eve is coming, do you bend the policy?
Possibly. We might reach out for outside help. I think every policy, sure, there's going to be like a circumstance where we might have to, vet
things
that
out.
differently and figure it out if there's an emergency. But our original policy was actually in place to help our worship leaders, so they had less vetting to do on their end, and we could do some initial vetting on our end. That way, by the time someone asks to volunteer with them, they know they're already in good standing with the church. They don't have to ask some of those other questions. They can just worry about, are you actually capable of playing the guitar?
So Tim, I have a question for you and Jeff. You said you're about to implement deacons, or you want to start instituting deacons at your church. So I have a question for you guys. Del, you guys are like Baptist adjacent, right? So you guys probably have deacons.
Basically, yeah, we do. And
then Andrew, you guys have deacons here?
We do not.
But
Okay,
not deaconesses. Just kidding.
So I'm unfamiliar. Like my entire life in the church, I've never been in a church that has the office of deacons. I'm obviously familiar with what deacons are, but I guess my question to you guys practically is, what does that look like? Because in my mind, like the way when I look at Lakeview and I see what the deacons are, if I could and I'm probably wrong in this, are deacons basically practically the leaders of a ministry to have oversight over those ministries? So, for example, there's the First Impressions team at Lakeview, which encompasses a lot of people. Like I think from the parking lot to the people who are handing out.
It's like 120 volunteers on that team.
So is the person over all of that a deacon? And so does that mean, like, for example, the prayer team has a deaconess? Like they're over all the everything that's the prayer. So like, would there be a worship deacon or a kids deacon, or because you have staff for that, that's not a deacon? Does that make sense? Like, so are these like the heads of departments basically?
Everything you just said, that's kind of how we operate at Lakeview. Yes, if we have staff running that ministry, that we don't have a deacon overseeing it, but for the most part, we have deacon overseeing those core ministries that you just listed.
So functionally, these are like staff volunteers that you are putting in these positions. Okay, that's helpful to know, because
I think one of the distinctions for me as I'm looking at it is they are also like boots on the ground doing the ministry.
Yeah, so
they're not just overseeing a ministry. Whereas the elders, yes, like, we have just 3 elders, but one of them is technically oversees like the Sunday morning service. He doesn't always lead anything in the Sunday morning service, whereas a deacon of, let's say, the tech team would pretty much always be in the booth or scheduling somebody in the booth or doing something on the ground ministry. So yeah, I think for me too, it's like you can get creative with how you help yourself as a pastor. For me, as a small church pastor, if I'm looking at this situation and let's say there are people who want to serve, one of the other areas I can create a spot for someone to serve as like a deacon would be mentorship roles for older members who maybe would say, I don't have the energy to serve in children's ministry. But I can say to them, but do you have the energy to mentor this younger person who wants to serve in children's ministry and is young in the faith? And what that looks like is like get coffee with them a couple times a month, have conversations with them about what they're learning, be the one that calls them and checks on them, like have that mentorship role with them. And so now you are serving the children's ministry indirectly. And you're also creating you're delegating as the pastor. I don't have to mentor everybody. I mentor the mentors, sort of. And so I think that could be another way. And it also just opens up, because I know, like in my church, a lot of my folks who are like, their kids are grown, sometimes they feel disconnected from some of the like next gen ministry stuff going on because like their kids are gone out of it now. And so I've had that conversation with a few people where it's like, hey, but you could mentor somebody who's younger, who's serving in those areas, and still have a connection to it. And you yourself now are also being discipled because you're in a like leading mentoring role. And so you're going to get asked questions you got to go figure out the answers to. You got to help somebody, and that's going to only deepen your walk as well.
Yeah, I think what I'm learning is, I think is contextually, there are certain things deacons and elders do. In Scripture, why were the deacons created? To create margin for the elders. So what our rule of thumb is that elders serve through leading and deacons lead through serving. So what that means practically for us is that if there's going to be a leadership team, then an elder is going to be over that, and he will have a deacon adjacent with him to help manage the technicalities of the team. But the elder is the identified leader of the team. Because he's not just responsible for making sure that the team functions, but for the spiritual health of the team. Because I'm sure every one of us has probably been a part of a team that functions well, but that's not spiritually healthy. So I think that it's important to have an elder in that space somewhere.
We also have a lead deacon, and this is really helpful because he holds the monthly meetings for the deacons, and then he actually attends the first half of every elder meeting with the monthly deacon update, which is super, super helpful. And it's very detailed. He'll send it out in advance. We read it. He doesn't go over the whole thing, but he keeps a detailed report for us every month, and it's really helpful.
So to this person's question, ultimately, I think that their thoughts are right in the sense that maybe if these are younger believers or new believers, they should probably like protect their spiritual health. But I don't think it means that they just sit dormant in church. Now, if the church is only one service, and that's, I'm sure when I plant my church and and Andrew, you have one service.
When you
Jeff,
plant the Lord's church. But anyway, go ahead.
It's Frank's church, Jeff. You heard him.
I heard it.
When this church is planted, I'm worried about like the spiritual health of those who are serving outside of the service, like in the kids ministry and stuff like that, because I want to make sure they get fed. But also, I understand that like even at Lakeview, we're running into this. Serving once a month in a kids ministry is not like that means you need 4 times the volunteers, right? Like to be able to staff that. So it's a complicated like game to be able to work all this out. So I'm praying about it. But what I do think is this person's right in their hesitation, but there must be a place to serve in the church for them. And I think maybe like first impressions, like if this church doesn't have like a welcome team, I think first impressions is great because they can open doors and then sit down and be a part of the service. Like that's a win.
Andrew, what's your policy with ladies walking by?
I was
going to
say, we moved out of my office, and it is so distracting out here because we're surrounded by windows, and someone just walked past with a corgi sticking out of a backpack.
It was a doggy backpack. Is that a thing on Sunday mornings here?
It's not. We're having less and less dogs.
It's weird.
But you know what? If
People
that
keep moving
woman
inside,
if that woman's a new believer
Yeah.
with her corgi and she comes in this church and says, "I want to
she could serve with the dog.
You know where she can serve? She can count the heads of the congregants.
Or she could be first impressions because we have people that sit outside. So even if you have your dog with you, you can hang out.
Yeah,
That's true.
But also, we usually count the dogs as well.
Andrew, my goal is that one day we're going to record this and you're going to say, guys, I've delegated the task of counting people to someone else. That's going to be
To the
One day.
deacon of counting.
Hey.
Wow.
the counting deacon.